Welcome back to the show. We have a particularly complex case on the table today, one that takes us down to the cold waters of Hobart, Tasmania.
Mm,
It's a story that begins on a public holiday, Australia Day, specifically January 26, 2009.
usually a day for celebration.
Exactly. Fireworks, barbecues, people out on the water. But for one couple, this day marks the beginning of a mystery that has, divided public opinion, baffled investigators, and resulted in a legal saga spanning more than a decade.
It's a case that presents a very unique set of forensic puzzles,
It's almost like a locked room mystery, isn't it? But the room is a yacht and it's floating on a river.
and that room was actively sinking. We're dealing with a crime scene that's disappearing, a missing victim, and ultimately a conviction based entirely on circumstantial evidence.
The central setting here is a vessel named the Four Winds. It's a 16-meter or about a 53-foot ketch.
Which is a substantial boat, not a small runabout. It has two masts.
Right. And it was moored out in the River Derwent, off the Maryville Esplanade. The owners were Bob Chappell, a 65-year-old radiation oncology medical physicist, and his partner of 18 years, Susan Neill-Fraser, who was 54 at the time.
They were an affluent couple, experienced with boats. Bob Chappell was a man of science, very precise in his work. They'd only bought this particular yacht a few months prior in Queensland and brought it down to Hobart.
So the premise of the disappearance is just stark. Bob Chappell was on board that day doing maintenance. He's working on his boat.
And he was never seen alive again.
Not a trace. Nobody has ever been found. And the next morning, the yacht isn't just sitting there empty, it was sinking. When the authorities arrived, they found physical traces suggesting foul play blood, a knife, but the man himself was just gone.
So the immediate question for police was this a random attack, a stranger coming across the docks, or was it something much closer to home?
And our objective here is to really parse that factual chronology. We need to look at the investigation, the forensic data from the vessel, the shifting accounts given by the accused, and the very complicated legal proceedings involving a secondary DNA profile.
The DNA profile is central to the appeals.
Let's start with the timeline of that specific day, January 26, 2009. It helps to visualize the movement. We know Bob Chappell went onto the Four Winds around 9:00 a.m.
He's there to work. It's a maintenance day. He has a list of tasks.
Right. And Sue Neill-Fraser was with him on the boat for a bit in the morning. She leaves and then comes back around 2:00 p.m.
Now, to get back and forth from the moored yacht to the shore, they used the yacht's tender. This was a small, white, inflatable dinghy with an outboard motor.
And this detail is crucial because the yacht is moored out in the water. You can't just walk off it. You are completely reliant on that little boat to get to land.
Absolutely.
So, Sue Neill-Fraser returns to the shore later that afternoon, leaving Bob on the yacht. He's still working, and this is the last time he is confirmed to be on board by anyone other than the accused.
And the court later made specific findings about her movements into the evening. They found she returned to shore in the afternoon, but then went back out to the yacht much later that night.
Which brings us to the witness sightings. These are always critical in a circumstantial case.
They are. Between 11:30 p.m. and midnight, a witness named John Hughes was parked near the rowing sheds at Maryville Esplanade. He reported seeing and hearing an inflatable dinghy with an outboard motor.
And the direction is important here, isn't it? It tells us where the boat was going.
Yes, it was coming from the direction of the Royal Yacht Club and heading northeast, which was roughly towards the Four Winds.
Okay.
And who was in it? Hughes stated there was one person in the dinghy. He described the person as having the outline of a female, though he was clear he could not be definitive about the identification.
Outline of a female. That phrase just echoes through the whole trial later. It's specific enough to be damning, but, just vague enough to be contested.
Exactly.
So that's the last real visual cue we have from the night of the 26th. So fast forward a few hours to the early morning of January 27.
At 5:40 a.m., a different witness finds that dinghy. It's not tied up at the club, it's just bobbing against some rocks.
Which is odd in itself.
Very. That witness secured the dinghy. Then, along with another man, he headed out into the water in his own boat. As they passed the Four Winds, they immediately noticed something was wrong.
What did they see?
The yacht was sitting very low in the water, unnaturally low.
So they board the vessel, police are called. Now you have to imagine walking onto that boat. It's taking on water, it's quiet. What did they find on board?
The forensic scene was disturbing. There was blood on the steps leading down into the cabin. There was a knife found on the floor of the wheelhouse. They also located a torch, a flashlight, that had blood on it.
But no sign of Bob Chappell?
No sign of Bob. And the boat is sinking.
And this wasn't an accidental leak, was it? This wasn't just a rusty pipe bursting.
No. The investigation quickly determined the sinking was a result of deliberate sabotage. There were two distinct mechanisms involved.
No.
Yes. First, a pipe leading to the forward toilet had been cut. Second, and this is key, a seacock, which is a valve in the hull, had been opened in the forward section of the yacht.
Let's pause on the seacock for a moment. For those listening who aren't sailors, explain what that is and why it's so important to the investigation.
A seacock is a valve on the hull of a boat that allows water to flow in or out. They're used for things like cooling engines or for toilet systems. In this case, the specific seacock was located under the flooring.
So hidden.
It was hidden under a carpet and a panel, and it served no apparent daily purpose. It wasn't something you'd need to access regularly.
So it wasn't something you just stumble upon. You had to know it was there.
Correct. Police with marine experience concluded that the person who did this had intimate knowledge of the four winds. It wasn't something a random intruder would likely find or even know how to operate to scuttle the vessel efficiently. It suggests the perpetrator knew exactly how to sink that boat and hide the evidence.
So the boat is eventually towed to Constitution Dock that afternoon on the 27th after they pump the water out. And Sue Neill-Fraser goes on board with the police. And this is an interesting moment because she starts pointing things out to them. She's active in the process.
She did. She pointed out several anomalies. She noted a green rope on the starboard side was in disarray. She pointed out a winch handle was misplaced. It was on the main mast winch when it shouldn't have been.
What else?
She identified cut ropes and noted that a fire extinguisher was missing from the main saloon. She also pointed out that the EPIRB, the emergency beacon, was missing from its bracket on the wheelhouse.
That EPRB detail is significant. If you are sinking a boat to hide a crime, the absolute last thing you want is an emergency beacon automatically activating and floating up and alerting the authorities to your exact location.
Precisely. The removal of the EPIRB indicates a level of planning and an understanding of marine safety equipment. It's not an amateur move.
While all this is happening on the yacht, the search for Bob is underway. They have divers in the water. I imagine that river is deep and dark.
Visibility was extremely poor. Divers searched the immediate area and to the south. Eventually, they brought in sonar equipment in April 2009.
And did that find anything?
The sonar identified 90 items of interest on the riverbed. They performed dives on 25 of those. None of them were Bob Chappell's body. To this date, his remains have not been recovered.
Let's look at the forensic testing that followed then. They have the dinghy, they have the yacht, and they have items found nearby. There was a lot of talk early on about the dinghy glowing.
Yes. The dinghy was subjected to luminol testing. Luminol is a screening chemical used to detect trace amounts of blood. It reacts with the iron in hemoglobin and causes a blue glow or chemiluminescence.
So the dinghy lit up.
It showed positive reactions in many areas.
But luminol isn't perfect, is it? It's not like a DNA match.
No, not at all. It is important to note that luminol is a presumptive test. It can react to other substances like bleach, certain metals, even some plant matter like horseradish. False positives are possible. It is not conclusive proof of blood presence without further lab confirmation.
Then there's the red jacket.
Right.
This becomes a key piece of physical evidence linking Sue to the area.
Police located a red jacket on a fence in Margaret Street, which is near the scene. Initially, Neill-Fraser denied any knowledge of it.
But it was hers.
DNA testing confirmed the jacket belonged to her. When confronted with this evidence later, she conceded ownership but claimed she had no idea how it could have ended up on that fence.
And then we get to the most significant forensic anomaly in this entire case. The one that fuels the appeals for years. The unknown female.
On January 30, while the yacht was out of the water at Goodwood for a full inspection, a swab was taken from the starboard walkway. This was an area that had returned a positive luminol result.
But did it have blood?
Subsequent testing for blood on that specific swab was negative. However, the swab yielded a full DNA profile of a female.
And at that time, they didn't know who it was. It was just a ghost in the machine.
Correct. The profile did not match Neill-Fraser, and at that specific time, it did not match anyone on the Tasmanian DNA database. The probability of a random coincidence was calculated at less than 1 in 100 million.
So a full, clear profile.
A very significant piece of genetic material with no explanation for its presence on the deck of that yacht.
So we have a missing man, a sabotaged boat, and a DNA mystery. But investigations so often turn on the behavior of the people left behind. And the prosecution's case against Sue Neill-Fraser leaned very heavily on what they called her lies, or at the very least, her shifting stories.
In a circumstantial case, Consistency is paramount for a suspect. If an account changes as new evidence is presented, prosecutors will argue this indicates a consciousness of guilt. And Neill-Fraser provided multiple different accounts of her movements on the night of January 26.
Let's walk through these accounts chronologically because the evolution of the story is, well, it's quite distinct. It starts with what we can call the Bunnings alibi.
This was her initial statement, given on January 28 and repeated on February 5. She claimed that after leaving the yacht and tying up the dinghy, she went to Bunnings, a large hardware chain.
And she gave details.
Oh, yes. She provided specific details. She wore a cream hat and beige shorts. She parked near the main entrance. She browsed the timber and paint sections. She claimed to be there for a long time, for hours.
But there was a problem with this, a massive problem.
A significant factual impossibility. Police checked the CCTV footage. She was not there. Furthermore, Bunnings closed at 6 p.m. that day because it was a public holiday. Her timeline of being there for hours into the evening was completely impossible.
So she's confronted with this. Her story doesn't hold up, so the story changes. We get account number 2.
On March 4, in a formal police interview, she backtracked. She said she was pretty sure she went to Bunnings, but, admitted she might not appear on camera. And in this same interview, she denied leaving her home at all on the night of January 26.
So she went from being out shopping for hours to being home all night. That's a huge shift.
It is.
But then she speaks to Bob's sister, Caroline, and this introduces account number 3.
Sometime around March 8 or 10, she admitted to Bob's sister that she did go back to the waterfront that night.
And what was her reason?
Her reasoning was that she received a phone call from a man named Richard King that had made her anxious. So she claimed she drove down to Sandy Bay, she looked at the yacht from the shore, saw it was in darkness, and then just drove home.
And she mentioned something else, didn't she? About who she saw there.
Yes, she mentioned seeing homeless people and fires in the area.
This was a major change in her story. First, she was at Bunnings. Then she was home all night. Now she admits being at the crime scene, or at least the shore overlooking it, late that night.
Correct.
Then comes account number 4, which adds even more complexity. This one is about keys and walking.
This version came out in late March and May. She told police that she hadn't just driven down there. She had actually walked from her home in West Hobart to the waterfront.
That's a long walk.
It is. And then the story involved a confusion with keys. She said she arrived at her car, but realized she had the wrong set of keys. She had her farm keys instead of her car keys.
Okay.
So she claimed she walked all the way back home to get the right keys, then walked back to the car again, and then drove down to the rowing sheds to view the boat.
It's a very convoluted sequence of events, walking, driving, wrong keys, going back and forth. It's hard to keep track of, and that's precisely the point the prosecution made.
The prosecution argued these were not the confused memory lapses of a grieving partner, but active attempts to construct an alibi that repeatedly fell apart under basic scrutiny.
And it all culminates in her arrest.
Yes. On August 20, 2009, Susan Neill-Fraser was arrested at her home and charged with murder.
So the trial takes place in 2010. And you have to remember, without a body and without a murder weapon directly linked to her hand, the prosecution had to build a wall of circumstantial evidence. They had to rely on
financial betterment. The opportunity was established by the witness sighting of the dinghy with the female-like outline heading toward the yacht late at night.
And the intent.
The intent was inferred from the deliberate and knowledgeable sabotage of the boat.
The logic regarding the stranger theory was central to their argument, wasn't it? They had to disprove the idea that someone else, a random person, could have done this.
It was. They argued it made no reasonable sense for a stranger to kill Bob Chappell and then go to the extraordinary effort of weighting and sinking his body. Remember, he weighs 64 kilograms using the yacht's winches.
And why sink the boat at all?
Exactly. Why would a stranger bother sinking the boat or clean up the carpet tiles? And most importantly, how would a stranger know where that hidden seacock was?
The cleanup was specific, too. It wasn't just, wiping a surface.
No. Carpet tiles had been taken up in the area where Chappell was known to be working. And to do that, one had to unscrew the feet of the stairs. This suggests a methodical, unhurried attempt to hide evidence, not a frenzied attack by a random intruder.
The defense, of course, their job is to create doubt. They pointed to the lack of direct evidence, and they had that mystery DNA. And by the time of the trial, that DNA finally had a name.
Yes. In March 2010, the DNA from the yacht's deck was matched to a woman named Megan Vass.
And who was she?
At the time of the murder, Megan Vass was a homeless girl. just 15 years old.
This is a crucial junction in the case. The defense argues, here it is. Here is DNA of a stranger on the boat. Doesn't this prove reasonable doubt? But Megan Vass denied being there.
This led to what is called a Basha inquiry. Because Vass had declined police interviews, this special inquiry was held in the absence of the jury to determine what her evidence would be if she was called to testify.
And what'd she say?
In the Basha inquiry, Vass testified that she had never been on the Four Winds. She claimed she was at a women's shelter that night.
She was sure about that.
She said she was pretty sure, but also admitted, I can't really remember. However, when she appeared before the jury, her denial was much more firm. She stated she was quite sure she had never been on the yacht or near Constitution Dock.
There was a moment where the defense tried to recall her, right? They found out something about that shelter alibi.
That's correct. After she testified, information surfaced suggesting she hadn't actually stayed at the shelter that night, as she had claimed. The defense applied to recall her to the stand to question her on this, but the judge and the prosecution refused the application.
So the jury is left with this. Her DNA is on the boat, but she's on the stand, under oath, saying she was never there. On October 15, 2010, the verdict comes in.
Guilty. It was a unanimous verdict.
The sentencing remarks by the judge, Justice Blow, were quite pointed. He didn't mince words at all.
No, he did not. He described Neill-Fraser as being clever and very cool-headed. He explicitly stated that he did not view this as a crime of passion or a sudden loss of self-control.
He saw it as planned.
He concluded it was an intentional killing for financial gain. He sentenced her to 26 years imprisonment with a non-parole period of 18 years.
That is a hefty sentence, but this was really just the beginning of the legal battle, not the end. The first appeal happened in 2011.
The defense argued that the failure to recall Megan Vass to the stand was a miscarriage of justice. They also challenged some of the judge's directions to the jury.
And the outcome.
The Court of Criminal Appeal upheld the conviction, meaning they agreed she was guilty, but they did reduce the sentence. They deemed the original 26-year term manifestly excessive and lowered it to 23 years, with a 13-year non-parole period.
She tried to go to the High Court in 2012, but was refused. At that point, it seemed like the end of the road, legally. But then the laws in Tasmania actually changed.
This is very significant development. Tasmania amended its Criminal Code Act 1924. This amendment allowed for second or subsequent appeals if there was fresh and compelling evidence. This opened a new door for Neill-Fraser to try again.
And the fresh evidence centered entirely on Megan Vass. The narrative around Vass becomes, well, it's incredibly volatile. It starts with a statutory declaration.
Yeah, in 2017, years after the trial, Megan Vass signed a formal statutory declaration. In this sworn document, she stated that she was on the boat that night and that Sue Neill-Fraser was not there.
That sounds like a bombshell. She completely recanted her trial testimony. This should have been the key to everything.
It certainly sounds like one, but the legal system tests the reliability of such recantations very rigorously. And when the appeal hearings began, the state alleged that this declaration was not genuine.
What do you mean?
They alleged that a former detective working for the defense, a man named Colin McLaren, had essentially fabricated the declaration and had offered Vass money to adopt it as her own.
So serious allegations of witness tampering. And when Vass actually got into the witness box for this appeal?
She flip-flopped. When called to court, she denied being on the boat again. She reverted to her original trial position, saying she was never there.
But then, and you almost can't make this up, she goes on national television. She goes on 60 Minutes.
Yes. After the court had adjourned for the day, Vass appeared on the program. And in that interview, she admitted to having detailed knowledge of the murder. This new development forced the court to reopen the case to consider this new material. She then provided a new affidavit claiming she was on the yacht with two males who assaulted Bob Chappell.
So we have a trial denial, a statutory declaration admission, a court denial, a TV admission. It's just dizzying. It's hard to know what to believe at any given moment.
It all culminated in the 2021 appeal hearing. Vass testified yet again. This time, she claimed she was on the boat with a boyfriend and that it was he who killed Chappell. But under cross-examination by the Director of Public Prosecutions, the entire story collapsed.
What happened in that cross-examination?
She broke down completely on the stand. She conceded, finally, that she was never on the boat. She claimed she had been harassed and pressured by Neill-Fraser's supporters to give false evidence to exonerate her.
At that point, Neill-Fraser's own defense team had to basically concede that Vass's evidence was useless.
Yes. Her lawyer, Robert Richter QC, had to admit that Vass's testimony could no longer support the appeal. However, they pivoted back to the science. They argued that regardless of what Megan Voss said, her DNA was there. The fundamental question remained, how did it get there?
Right. The secondary transfer theory versus primary deposit, this is where the forensics get very granular.
Exactly. The defense called a forensic expert who testified that the DNA found was likely a primary deposit. This means it came from direct contact, a body fluid like saliva or sweat, originating from Voss directly onto that spot on the boat,
As opposed to secondary transfer.
as opposed to secondary transfer, which would be something like her DNA getting on someone else's shoe and that person walking it onto the boat. The expert argued that was less likely for the quantity and quality of the DNA that was found.
But despite this purely forensic argument, the appeal did not succeed.
No. In November 2021, the appeal was dismissed by a 2-1 majority. 2 judges rejected the appeal, while one, Justice Escort, dissented. He found there had been a miscarriage of justice.
The High Court then refused special leave to appeal again in August 2022. So the legal road was, again, closed.
It was.
While the courts were remaining firm on the conviction, the political sphere in Tasmania was becoming uneasy about this case.
That's true. In August 2021, Mike Gaffney, who is a member of the Legislative Council, tabled documents in the Tasmanian Parliament. He alleged there had been an inadequate police investigation and that misleading evidence had been presented.
He said what exactly?
He stated on the parliamentary record that he believed the courts had been misled and that, in his view, a woman had been wrongfully incarcerated.
So, a politician taking a very strong public stance. But even with the conviction standing, the clock was ticking on her sentence.
She became eligible for parole. On September 16, 2022, the Parole Board of Tasmania granted her application. And on October 4, 2022, Susan Neill-Fraser walked out of prison after serving 13 years.
So she is out, but she is not exonerated. That's the crucial distinction.
That is the legal reality. The conviction for murder stands. She is, in the eyes of the law, a convicted murderer who is now on parole.
It's a case that just leaves you with such an unsettling feeling. On one side, you have a missing man, a sinking boat, and a partner who told demonstrably false stories about her whereabouts. That looks very damning.
He does.
But on the other side, you have a DNA match to a homeless teenager on the crime scene. A teenager whose story changed so many times you get whiplash. Admitted, denied, being there.
The presence of that DNA remains the singular, most confounding fact of the entire case. If Megan Voss was never there, as the court ultimately had to accept based on her final recantation, the mechanism of how her DNA arrived on that specific spot on the deck of a yacht she had no connection to, it remains a matter of probability and, really, speculation.
Bob Chappell is still missing. His family has never had a body to bury. Susan Neill-Fraser still maintains her innocence. The Four Winds case is technically closed, but the questions it raised about circumstantial evidence, forensic anomalies, and the reliability of witnesses, they continue to circulate.
It serves as a stark reminder of the complexities of the justice system when direct evidence is absent. The court must weave a tapestry from the threads available, movements, lies, the mechanics of a boat, but sometimes there's a loose thread that just won't fit the pattern, no matter how you look at it.
It's certainly one of those cases that you can turn over in your mind again and again. The combination of, these technical marine details and just sheer human unreliability makes it incredibly difficult to pin down.
Indeed. It really challenges our understanding of what constitutes certainty in a criminal trial.
Thank you for joining us for this examination of the Bob Chappell disappearance. It's a lot to process, and we appreciate you spending the time with us to understand the details behind the headlines.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for listening.